Mini episode 752 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everybody. Rick Morris and Kyle Ross, your favorite FDH Lounge football talkers in all the land, coming at you today to talk NFL previews. We are going through division by division on this year's landscape, and right here, right now,
as we do every year,
yes, it's NFC North time, not to be confused with clobbering time, although the city of CM Punk, Chicago, is in this division, but it is the old black and blue division, as it was once known, the Norris division, as it used to be called in the halcyon days of NFL prime time. The contents of which are being scattered by the wayside at ESPN even as we speak.
I feel bad for Tom Jackson. Yes.
He's been mailing it in for like 15 years, hasn't he?
Yes.
Okay.
But, I don't know, I saw, the Berman and Tom Jackson send-off, and I feel honestly, look, I think it's a tired act. I don't watch it anymore. Yeah. But I just caught it, a late night on sports. I'm like, God, doesn't Tom Jackson kind of deserve better than, a late Sunday night send-off? Sitting in the dark in Canton?
I used to,
didn't they deserve
after a game that didn't even happen, no less.
Yeah. Didn't they deserve a victory lap, kind of? With old primetime clips?
Well, yeah, probably should have done so. And usually they're a little bit better at leveraging, exploiting their history than that. But, the way that I look at it, everybody's like, oh, well, primetime was so great back in the day. I'm like, there was also a Wayans Brothers sitcom I really enjoyed back in the 90s, but I was like, it feels like a product of its time, and so does, quite frankly, NFL primetime. It's just not anything.
Well, all of those shows do. I'm sorry, my computer died here, folks.
All right.
Just bear with us. That's real professional.
We're doing a little bit of triage here on air, getting it plugged in. There we go. A little bit of electronic CPR for that bad boy.
There we go.
And
I think those shows are just outdated anyway. But anyway,
very possibly, yeah. I love George Michael's Sports Machine too, but that's not something you could imagine watching in 2016. Yeah. Not least of which because Mr. Michael's no longer around.
Can you imagine in 2016 the Minnesota Vikings repeating as NFC North champions?
That to me is about as unfathomable as sitting here and saying that we know exactly what the wrestling landscape would have looked like, again, back in the 90s, had Eric Embry not gotten injured. That's an imponderable every bit as big, because obviously in the 90s, that's the big what-if moment. And then this year, I love the look on your face.
What the hell are you even saying?
I've been watching some old USWA recently on YouTube.
The word saying you just threw me off for such a loop.
I just don't you think Eric Embry would have been huge in the Attitude Era? That's a talent that we missed out on. You don't think so? No. You need to watch a little more USWA on YouTube.
Looking over, Minnesota has been a kind of schizophrenic team for the most part.
Yeah.
From year to year in terms of wins. They went from 3 wins to 10 wins in 2011 to 2012. The next year, they won 5 only.
Yeah.
Predictably, then they bumped up in 2014 to 7. Mm-hmm. And then last year was the big jump to 11-5 and the win. 4 wins is always when the plexiglass principle comes into effect. I always say that's kind of the sweet spot. So you would expect some regression here from the Vikings. Vegas says 9.5. Rick Morris.
I say
what
9.
Says you?
9 and no division title or a wild card. Having said that, though, I think we need to do fairness to the past, and we need to just kind of take a look here at what we're talking about with 2015 in the landscape here, because a year ago it was being posited in many corners that it was a hipster pick to say that Minnesota would make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Yours truly stuck his neck out there bravely and said, call me a hipster if you must, but they will be a wild card team. And I actually undershot the magnitude of their accomplishment. They won the division outright. So
yeah.
I don't...
Can I be clear about something, though?
Go ahead.
It's not that I dislike Minnesota last year or even this year. I like their roster construction.
It's getting better and better, yeah.
I just think when you look at it, they've been a little lucky and they jumped up. This is a team last 2 years, 3-0 in overtime games.
Yeah.
That's a little something to consider. They've had some good fortune go their way, and the schedule, it's something that I always hype on, too, that they don't beat the good teams on the schedule. Now they're playing a first-place schedule.
Beat Green Bay will win the division Week 17 last year. You got nothing for that.
That was their first win of the kind.
Okay.
Are we sure Green Bay didn't mail that in? They did do that. You're right. And I remember you and I had that discussion going into that game. And I said, well, if they win this week, then it'll be the first time. And they did. Okay. You're right. They beat them 20-13 in Lambeau Field. My hat's off to them, whatever. Key here.
Mm-hmm.
2 things. New stadium, we know that teams tend to regress in a new stadium. They don't have the same home record because they're getting used to it just like their opponents are. Adrian Peterson, this is where I made a big miscalculation last year, was with AP. He was fresh coming off the year where he was out. He is not going to be as fresh coming into this year.
That's right.
I think, and he was a big reason that he took a big load off Teddy Bridgewater, is what I'm trying to say here. I don't know if he'll be as effective, and conversely, I'm not sure Bridgewater will be as effective this year. Teddy Bridgewater's a guy who opinions will vary.
I think he will continue to step up and improve. I don't know that it will be that his improvement will be enough to offset AP's fall off, which I agree with you is coming, because AP's, when you're talking about a first ballot Hall of Fame running, if we're just looking on field, a first ballot Hall of Fame running back, you can't account for the loss of that in any kind of other way that does justice to it. Again, it's very, very interesting because much like when we were reviewing Washington, and I had the parallel come to my mind as far as career years at quarterback, whether it be the situation that you had there last year with the emergence 25 years after the flash emergence of Mark Rippon. I'm also sensing a parallel that I hadn't had in my head before. Washington and Minnesota went through the same trajectories the last couple of years, having to shed quarterbacks, go through the wilderness. It was a long 3-year period. It felt like a lot longer than 3 years in both instances for them to both make it back to the playoffs the same year. I'm going to say about Minnesota what I said about Washington. Short-term sell, medium-term buy.
I absolutely agree. I think there's something to be said there.
Yeah, they're building a nice program. I just don't think it includes making the playoffs this year.
Their defense, by the way, recovered 8 of a possible 11 fumbles last year. That's what we call fumble luck.
And that's the whole thing, too. Any team, again, there are so many teams, and it seems like particularly in the AFC most years, but also some of the obvious teams in the NFC. There are obvious repeat teams. You just know that there won't be that many of them. Any team that's low-hanging fruit as far as missing the playoffs, I'm going to pick against them. Minnesota, like Washington, falls into that category.
I actually, even though I don't think it's going to be an easy win, would recommend betting under 9.5 here. I see this team as an 8 or 9 win team.
I got them at 9. I'd still be queasy to bet the under, but,
You can get plus money at it, plus 107.
Okay.
You mentioned the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
What about the effect that loss to Seattle has?
Tough loss. Sometimes that'll haunt you going into the next year, a game they never should have lost. Yeah. So you have to wonder about that as well.
They also were a team that outperformed their Pythagorean win expectation by more than 1.
Yeah.
They're based on point differential. They should air quotes, only have won 9.8 games. So, yeah, I mean, I don't. We've got to be in agreement here. You look at them going 11-5. I don't think that was really indicative of the true talent. I think a lot went right. But Mike Zimmer's a good coach, and they built the roster the right way. I agree with you that if they do fall this year, they're kind of likely to bounce back in 2017.
Yep. I'll call it already. 2017 playoff team. I just don't think 2016. You'll look at this division, and spoiler alert, I may or may not have 2 teams in this division still making the playoffs. More on that later. But
they were 5-1 in division games too last year. The Vikings. That's big.
Well, you split with Green Bay, and then you bitch slap the other teams in there. You can kind of see that coming. Mm-hmm. you look at this.
Well, do you think they'll repeat? I think that's tough to go 5-1.
They're not going to. I don't see that.
That's really tough to go 5-1 in the division back-to-back years.
I think they're back in the pack, so to speak, in the division here. And speaking of the pack, capital P, if we're not picking Minnesota, process of elimination. Who's going to win the division?
Well, I think everyone's going to pick Green Bay.
The perennial incumbent, if you will. I got them at 12-4. I got them as the number 1 seed in the NFC, the Green Bay Packers. And I look at this, and again, it's always easy to sort of question what they're doing. Well, last year offensively, they looked uncharacteristically ragged a lot. The loss of Jordy Nelson kind of exposed them because Randall Cobb did not have any ability to step up whatsoever. And the rest of these guys in there, you plug in James Jones, you get the September kind of mirage. The one thing I had a laugh at was a good friend of mine, fellow member of the 21st Century Media Alliance, Mr. Flatstick Tom Denk, had the strategy at one of our fantasy football drafts last year. Tom likes to do a lot of these smartest guy in the room, self-appointed type moves here. I love you to death, Tom, but you know it's true. He spent like 5 or 6 late-round picks on like just about every receiver on the roster. This is after Nelson went down, like Abradaris and the other guys. He's drafting like all of them. Richard Rodgers in a league where it's not even tight end mandatory because it's an old school league. And then he gets screwed when James Jones signs with them after the draft. I was like, that was the greatest thing of karma that I've ever seen.
I actually made similar mistakes in my job. I thought I was cool. I was like picking like these cool random guys I thought would be sweet as to be like my 4th and 5th receivers. Like I don't think it combined like any of them had a catch.
Those things are high risk, high reward. But I look at this roster and I have questions. But here's the thing too, and
they weren't very good last year.
They weren't. But what has been good, and I've read a little bit of stuff on them, and as far as some of the continuing kind of retooling that Mike McCarthy is doing, and maybe that's the kind of thing that becomes necessary in a multi-year program with a lot of stability that they have, is to kind of take a fresh look at what's working, what's not working, and they were forced to kind of do that. And I'm going to make a parallel with another sport this year. It's something that I didn't like seeing, but I think that applies to Green Bay. And I'd be indifferent if it applied to Green Bay. I don't have anything really for or against them in my own heart. But the Penguins in the NHL, who I'm not a fan of, and
such style and grace,
Cindy Crosby and all the rest of them there, they finally got the second Stanley Cup of the Crosby era. But you look at it, and it's kind of like, well, they were almost kind of due. That you figure they're going to win at least 2 while he's around, if not more than that. It's kind of the same thing with Aaron Rodgers. We're starting to get to that point now where it's been enough years away from the Super Bowl to say they're kind of due for it to happen. They're kind of due to get back there. And I'm going to make my early pick here. Green Bay, I got them as the number 1 seed in the NFC. And as we know, a lot of times that's half the battle. If you got to go someplace to do it. Now, if the Giants have another miracle run and go into Lambeau, anything's possible. But you and I don't really see that happening. That's one of the only times that they've been toppled in recent years. Actually, I think it happened on both the Giants' Super Bowl runs going into Lambeau. But since they won't have to worry about the Giants in the playoffs, I don't think. Yeah, I got Green Bay coming out of the NFC as the number 1 seed. I'll say it now.
I definitely have them winning the division, but I have them as the 2 seed.
So still getting a bye.
Behind the West winner, yeah.
Okay.
I had them as the number 2 seed last year. Obviously, you can't forecast injuries. The Jordy Nelson injury, there is no doubt, played a significant role in their regression. Backing up what I just said moments ago, that this was not a good team last year. They were only 19th in yards per game differential, minus 12.1. Interestingly, Minnesota was 21st at minus 23.
Right.
So you take a look to Green Bay. Obviously, their win total dipped from 2014, only slightly. They went from 12 to 10. So, I think I had them at 11 last year. I think all things considered, they won a playoff game. We kind of saw Green Bay's floor last year, which has got to be scary for the rest of the NFC.
There are other things that will not repeat themselves with Green Bay, because one of the things, again, for as much as you and I love making references and comparisons to the sport of kings, but whenever the announcers on TV would start talking about late career Junkyard Dog, Iron Sheik, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Oh, he's really bulked up, folks. We all know what that was sort of, kayfabe for. That was Eddie Lacy last year, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, Eddie Lacy was looking like late career Iron Sheik / Junkyard Dog / Hacksaw Jim Duggan with regards to his conditioning. This year, a little closer to Rich Swann. So I look for a breakthrough in the running game here. Eddie Lacy is going to be a very undervalued running back fantasy-wise.
So over 10.5 for you.
Yeah, 12-4.
I would go over 10.5.
Bet the mortgage.
That's a little strong. But, again, I've got this as an 11. 12 I could see.
Yeah.
But I do not see them winning fewer than 10 games.
Okay.
I mean, they won 10 last year.
Okay.
And they're a better team.
Well,
and here's a real key. As I had already actually moved to our next team, I wanted to bring this up. I had moved it.
Okay.
Because they don't play the first place schedule this year, that's a big break.
Sure.
They go from the 9th hardest schedule to 29th this year. That is a massive difference.
It is. It is. And that's, I have to say, too, that in terms of looking at what they did last year, in terms of strength of schedule, Green Bay had the 3rd hardest schedule on the FDH index, and as far as the impressiveness of victories index, they were 1st in the league.
Okay, so that's
when you combine strength of schedule and victories.
What Football Outsiders was saying.
Yeah.
They played a hard schedule last year.
Yeah, they did a lot without Jordy Nelson, so as I look at that makes me
this
even more
just in. Aaron
confident.
Rodgers is probably the best quarterback in the game. So.
This just in. So there's that. The next team that we were going to look at, I
think, can't see them, just like I can't see Minnesota going 5-1 against the division again this year. I can't see Green Bay going only 3-3 against the division for a second straight year.
That was last year was a year where some of the lesser lights could kind of take their shots at them, get in some lucky blows. You're not going to see that.
They also
repeat
play
itself.
the AFC South non-conference.
Ooh,
typically a boon.
Yeah, good chance to fatten up there. In the NFC East, you and I went for the team that we both think is going to be the last place team as our 3rd team to talk about because it makes it more interesting to kind of finish
Actually,
up.
We didn't.
Yeah, we both agreed Philly is going to finish.
Yeah, we talked about them second.
Oh, did we?
Yeah, we went Washington, then Philly.
My memory's heinous. It's
just really bad.
Okay.
That was no. It went Washington. I mean, if I'm correcting you on memory, that's bad.
That's a look in the mirror moment when Kyle Ross is correcting you on memory, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Well, my point was we didn't do them last, but I apparently misspoke. We didn't do Philly last, and we're not going to do Detroit last because we would like to finish on more of an upswing as far as what we're going to talk about here.
Well,
analytically.
Well,
last place teams are never as interesting to finish on.
Agreed, and
unless they're a real dumpster fire.
Yeah. Well, and with the East, we finished with the Giants because it was the most interesting. It was me picking them first was kind of the most interesting projection.
That's right.
And I think that the team we'll get to last year in the North is the most interesting projection from one of us.
That's right. So looking at this division here, unsurprisingly, I think to a lot of people, you and I both have Detroit in last place because.
Well, I've got them in a tie, actually.
All right. Well, they're flat out last place for me. 7-9, same as Philly 7-9, and in both instances, I'm second guessing myself. I'm going to stay 7-9, but Detroit's a team that I could just see things going even worse for than that. They're trying to make up with Calvin Johnson by committee, as it were, which is always kind of a daunting kind of a task. And part of it is they're in a little bit of the same kind of situation organizationally as Tennessee, that you're waiting for the next shoe to drop because there's not that stability with ownership. There's always the chance that somebody else, the likelihood, I think, that somebody else is going to come in and going to want to go in another direction. People looking over their shoulders. They're still in a lot of ways kind of reeling from the loss of Ndamukong Kong Suh a year ago to Miami in free agency. So it just too many question marks in my mind. I think Matt Stafford is going to step back up and continue to kind of pull out of that mid to later career funk that he was in. A year ago, it wasn't even that far-fetched a possibility that he might get down to the point where the Browns could pluck him away for a second or a third-round pick. There were those rumors out there. He's back to the point of being seen as, if not a cornerstone, then certainly one of the guys on this roster who is regarded as a strength, not a weakness. But I don't think it's going to be enough. A 7-9 record, I'm now even dubious they're going to get back to that point. But I don't see enough strengths on this team. I don't see enough positive things going their way.
I also have them at 7-9. And it feels that that's kind of the ceiling, doesn't it? Like, it feels like that's almost like a best case, which is kind of scary. This is the team where I feel, and every year there's a team where it's like, okay, I pick them kind of at their height. It's not a great height. You know, It's like 7 wins, but I'm like, there is the potential for the bottom to drop out. And obviously it's because of Calvin Johnson being gone. Mm-hmm. But you know me, I'm kind of a contrarian by nature, and I just think them picking all the wheels to fall off is too simplistic of a view here. They did go from 11 wins in 2014 to 7 last year. Normally you'd pick a bit of an uptick.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think the decline or the natural progression you'd normally see after a 2-year span like that is kind of offset by the loss of the top offensive weapon.
Yeah.
So I'm going with a second straight 7-9. Vegas, interestingly, has them fit at 7-9. Little bit of juice toward the over. I guess just because of the numbers, like I said, there's normally kind of an uptick there when you decline like that. I cannot possibly see this team winning 8 games.
I'm about to enunciate something kind of bizarre about Detroit. I hope you'll be able to follow my point, but I'm not completely convinced that you will. I look at them. I look at the way that they played last year, and particularly after they made the shakeups on the coaching staff mid-season here, and they finished 7-9, and they weren't an impressive team, obviously, but.
Yeah, I think they went on a late game winning streak too. Remember, they were 1-6 at one point, weren't they?
They were. That's what prompted the thing here that what's his face, Billy Joe Cooter or whatever the hell his name is, became their new offensive coordinator. But it became a situation where they impressed me as being overachievers. Jim Bob Cooter. They impressed me with their sort of overachieving spirit, and I think that's why I said 7-9 again this year. Is that I can't. That's not a good reason to go 7-9. It's not a good reason to pick them for that. But it did impress me. They didn't quit down the stretch. They didn't look like they were as good as their record. And I guess I just figured that might carry over into another season. That you look at them and on paper you think they got enough holes that they're really not going to be that good of a team. But I guess they've just sort of impressed me with their to go puro here for a second with you fighting spirit. And that maybe they're not going to be as heinous as they should be. I talk about damning with faint praise, but that's how I got them at 7-9.
What's the floor for this team?
Oh, the floor is 3 or 4 wins. I mean,
you think so?
Clearly.
Okay, wow,
yeah. Okay. And the ceiling's not much higher than 7-9.
No, that's what I'm saying. I feel like I'm picking them near their ceiling, and it's not a high ceiling.
If everything goes right with this team, they're 8-8. So. That's where I really should have picked them more like 5 or 6 wins, but I'm gonna. This is the bed that I made.
They were actually 17th in yards per game differential last year, better than both the Packers and Vikings.
Okay.
You know what? As we pivot to the last team, so I've already got my eye on them, and I'm kind of looking.
By the way, quick note on the FDH Impressiveness of Victories Index, they were 5th last year, so I'll give them that. That's in defense of my 7 wins pick here. I realize I'm grasping at straws.
Okay. Can we pivot now?
Yes.
All right.
I hope you pivot more successfully than Donald Trump has tried to do.
Okay, yes. I'm looking at some numbers here for this next team, which is the Bears, and I know you're high on them.
Yes.
Much higher than I am. And I'm glad that you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think between the two of us, it's good that, I'm glad that I think one of us needs to be saying that there is a chance the Bears should be good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going with the 2 teams out of the East to make it, but if I feel if there's only one team that makes it out of the East,
okay,
the Bears are the dark horse that will step up otherwise in the NFC to get it. There's a lot of factors that suggest this team is on the rise. Why do you think they're going to be on the rise? Because I know you do like them.
Well, and I should be a little bit more upset at the notion if I'm going to be picking them as a playoff team. By the way, they were 4th a year ago on the FDH Impressiveness of Victories Index, just ahead of Detroit.
It seems that this division had a hard schedule last year, and this year, again, it speaks to the move to the AFC South. The schedule's a lot easier this year.
Impressiveness of Victories Index for the league last year. Here's your top 5. Green Bay, Denver, Minnesota, Chicago, Detroit. This just in. 4 of the 5 teams were from the NFC North. So actually, Detroit was the worst of the 4 teams there at 5th in the league. But I think that with Adam Gase being gone, that should mitigate against my pick. I got them 9-7, and this just in, folks. I got them as a wild card team. I think they're going to make it. I think that Jay Cutler is going to be able to consolidate enough of the gains that he made last year. I don't think he necessarily just sort of reverts back to where he was previously. I have been, ever since he came out in the draft, a big Kevin White guy. And I think, again, this is an injury where supposedly he should have been back in late last season, but sometimes you have a setback there. So there may be something to worry about long term in terms of maybe the recovery, and we won't really know until the season starts. Training camp only tells you so much. But you put a Kevin White who's able to go in there opposite Alshon Jeffrey. You got a big improvement there. I'm not as sold as the rest of the league is. It seems to be on Jeremy Langford, but they're sold.
I'm not either.
They're sold. I'm going to defer somewhat.
I've seen him labeled as a potential bust in fantasy.
Yeah, and I agree with that because I think that's part of it there. I guess just I'm looking more big picture. Year 2 and onward has always been a good time. John Fox is a good builder of teams, ladies and gentlemen. One of the only coaches ever to take 2 different teams to the Super Bowl. Didn't win either of them, but sometimes that's the hand you're dealt as far as the team. And I'm looking more so at the program that's being built there in Chicago, year 2. Yes, it's going to hurt to lose Adam Gase, but I think there's
big. That's really big. That's, I think, why I ultimately didn't go with him.
Yeah, and I understand that. I
think is Jay Cutler really going to make the quantum leap at this stage of his career?
No.
I feel that the cap hit reduces significantly at the end of this season.
They don't need a quantum leap. They more or less just need him to not regress from where he was last year. So I think that, and again, as you said, it's a year where he could be more expendable at the end of it. Should be a better, more focused Jay Cutler, and somebody who. And this is not a minimal kind of a thing here. This is not something that really doesn't matter. I may be wrong, but because we're all kind of judging these things from afar. But a Jay Cutler who objectively seems like less of an a-hole than he was, say, 3-4 years ago. I don't know.
Was he ever one? I mean, I don't know the guy personally. That's something that's never interested me, how these guys are.
I can go by the public statements, and some of the public statements that he made where he could kind of come off as an a-hole. And, I remember in particular where his now wife, Kristen Cavallari, a period of time back when they were dating, when they had broken up, and there were, like, some of his, fans on social media and whatever that were like taking up for him, and some of them a little bit too vociferously. But maybe this is a guy who knew he was going to get back together with her and didn't want to burn his bridges. But I remember like making comments out there of like, shut up, you a-holes, you don't know anything about this. Yeah, there were probably people that were too vociferous in defending him. But from the standpoint of, like, he just always seemed to have that ungrateful air towards everybody, and he doesn't seem to admit that as much now. I'm saying we're all judging this
kid, right?
But that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's just
the usual mellowing that you get.
Yeah,
he's a guy who could only benefit from that as a player.
I'm married. I'm still an asshole. Chicago.
Wait till the Rugrats start popping out.
Chicago was actually, in terms of yards per game differential, best in the division last year, but only 16th overall in the league, minus 0.8 yards per game. So that's a basically net watch. We talk about the schedule. Last year, they had the 4th hardest schedule, according to Football Outsiders. This year, it drops to 28th. That is a massive change.
Okay.
When I look at them and the Giants have the better point differential, though. So if I'm kind of wavering between those two as one of them being kind of a best-case scenario, the Giants win in that metric. The Giants were 6-10, a minus 22-point differential. The Bears 6-10 with a minus 62-point differential. But are the Bears going to go 1-7 at home again this year, like they did last year?
That's it too.
I've been saying this for years. They have a very poor home record.
I kept waiting for that to turn around last year.
Soldier Field has not been kind to this team recently, and you'd like to think that that's going to change.
I will say this, and again,
but I think the loss of Gase and sort of just, I don't know, the staleness of Cutler keeps his team from improving too much. I've got them at 7-9. Vegas has them at 7 wins. So
I'm glad you gave me a chance to remember to put myself over even before we start getting to the week-by-week NFL picks this year.
Oh, Jesus
But last
Christ.
year, doing the inhuman, doing the superhuman and incredible, going 52.4% for the entire season, being profitable, picking every game. I will tell you this. The team that probably, I think, killed me more than just about any other team was Chicago. Because when you mentioned about the home games, Kyle, I remember saying to you repeatedly, this can't keep going on. This can't. They've lost too many at home. They can't. It's due to turn around. There I am, Mr. Law of Averages, right? It's due to turn around. It's due to turn around. That's like my failed roulette system of many years ago of rotating between red and black. It's due to turn around. It's due to turn around. You're right that it will this year. Kyle, it will turn around this year. I might have been wrong week by week last year, but I'm right. Macro picture 2016. The Bears will turn it around at home.
Non-division home games for the Chicago Bears.
Okay.
Philadelphia. We don't like them. That's a
Yeah.
Monday night game, by the way, week 2. Jacksonville, we're split on them. I think that's very winnable, considering what I think of Jacksonville.
Ooh, Jacksonville's a playoff team to me.
Tennessee.
That's winnable. Very winnable.
San Francisco.
Very winnable. 3-1, buddy. Pencil it in.
Washington. Those are the 5. Yeah, I think that those are...
Washington's a coin flip.
Okay, well, I mean, I like the one. I think they could go 4-1 in those 5 games. Now, the road schedule...
I'll say 3-1-1.
They're going to tie.
Well, I think it's 50-50 on Washington, so I'll pick it as a tie. You don't like my logic?
No. I'd like to pick them to improve big, but I'm going with the Giants to improve big. So this is just a moderate improvement. So
okay.
I think one of us is going to be right. Either the Giants or the Bears are going to make the playoffs.
Do you, as far as how you label things, do you consider a 3-win improvement moderate? It's moderate-ish.
No,
but
3 is pretty significant. Out of a
Three
16-game sample size,
okay.
I would say 1 or 2 is moderate.
All right, so 3 is above moderate in your mind. Okay.
I mean, if you're more than 4, that's huge.
All right. So I got 2 playoff teams in this division. You said 2 out of the East, with the Gents winning it and Dallas is the wild card. I have Green Bay winning the North, as do probably most people this year. And Chicago as the wild card.
The key for Chicago is if Detroit does fall off a cliff, that's huge for them. I think their key is they need to sweep Detroit.
Yeah, that's going to be a big one here. And I know that you find this gutless, but I'm going to say now, I still think Minnesota's probably a better team than Chicago, but I'm going to have Chicago taking the tiebreaker at 9-7. I know that you find it gutless when I do that.
That's so shitty.
Well... The Rick Morris system in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning into our NFC North picks for this year.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, Waitresses, Strippers, Bartenders, Garbage Men, Janitors, Microwave Popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and The Periodic Table of Elements.